folks, hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. So I want to do this video today and talk about Paul Stanley a little bit. I'm a huge Kiss fan. I grew up with Paul Stanley. He was sort of, my rock star kind of iconic figure growing up, and always been a fan of his. And I wanted to talk a little bit about his vocals, and I'm going to choose for me anyway, are my 5 favorite vocals of Paul Stanley throughout his career. Now, if you're a fan of Kiss, you probably know all this, but Paul's voice went through some changes. He had that when he was younger in the 70s. He had a pretty a pretty normal voice. When he would push hard, his voice would crack a little bit. Well, he didn't have crazy range. He just had like a good, that sort of atypical 70s rock star kind of belter type voice to him, right? And then around the early 80s, you can see that he'd been, going to a voice coach and trying to expand his range. And then you notice that, through the early 80s, his range was starting to get a little bit bigger and he was starting to go a little bit high, not so much falsetto, but full voice going high. And that sounded pretty cool. And then in the mid 80s, then he was basically trying to shatter glass, and he was doing that a lot. And that's sort of where, I kind of tail off a little bit with his singing, because, when you hit those certain frequencies and you kind of stay up there, it does sort of, for me anyway, it does give me a little bit of ear fatigue. And then, of course, he had a nice, powerful voice through the 90s, and then I'd say mid 2000s, singing all those years and his age, whatever, his voice started to deteriorate a little bit, and like everybody else, he gets older, right? So, but yeah, so I want to talk about or mention my 5 favorite vocal performances from Paul Stanley, and they kind of go through a little bit of a range here. So, starting with number 5. All right, for number 5, this is off the Rock and Roll Over record. And the song I'm going to talk about is Mr. Speed. The vocal on this, what I really dig about Paul's vocal on this is just, it's so full of attitude. It's that, hey, I'm a young rock star full of piss and vinegar. I can get all the ladies, that whole rock and roll swagger, attitude, whatever. It's all in this song, and so it's not so much, vocally, it's mind blowing. It's more like the intent and the vibe of the vocal on this that I always really dug. So for number 5, I'm going with Mr. Speed off of Rock and Roll Over. All right, so for number 4, I'm going to go with the song that is probably not really well known, because it appeared on a compilation called Killers that they put out right after The Elder, and it was 4 new songs, and then the rest were were not cover songs. The rest were other songs, existing songs, and he just did a compilation for originally the European market, because The Elder didn't do very well anyway. But there's a song on there called Nowhere to Run. And that was the performance, the emotion in that. He's really pushing hard, and there's some really, he hits some really high falsetto notes there, especially at on the end of this song. It's very emotive. It's very powerful. He's going for it, and then he's hitting those that high falsetto part in there is just really, really cool. It's almost full voice. He's almost getting there. But, yeah, I really always dug the vocal on that Nowhere to Run off of Killers. All right, number 3. Now, these aren't necessarily my favorite Kiss songs. These are just my favorite Paul Stanley moments. So, because this song is okay. It's not one of my favorites, but his singing on it's really good. And I'm talking about A Million to One from Lick It Up. He's really going for it on this one. He's got that long held note over the breakdown in the middle. It's just really impressive. I mean, he's just This I think was probably my favorite period of his vocals because he's got the power, um, and he's got the range without it getting into sort of the ice picky, super high thing. And this was sort of like the capping point because from here, with Animal Eyes and Asylum, songs like Get All You Can Take, where like he's up here for the whole song and it just kind of wears on me. A Million to One and the Lick It Up record, I think, is where he should have stayed, honestly, because he was sounding really good. And this song's got a very impressive, powerful vocal, and he's holding some really, some notes really firmly on this. So, yeah, A Million to One is my number 3. All right, so for my number 2, now this is going back to the Paul's 78 solo album. This vocal is amazing. It's because it's a lot of light and shade, so there's dynamics to it. He's singing almost kind of at a whisper, and then he belts it, and then he kind of comes back. I'm talking about Take Me Away, Together as One. Always love this song. It's so epic and dramatic. And Paul's vocals and the control in his voice, especially when he's singing, almost sort of a whisper tone on the verses is pretty impressive. And then when he opens up full voice and he's just belting it, it's just a really good song. It shows off the dynamic range of at the time of Paul's voice. And again, I'm kind of partial to that era of his vocals and up to about Look It Up, as I mentioned earlier. And he just sounds fantastic on this song. It's always been one of my favorite vocal performances from Paul. All right, my number 1. This vocal performance always knocked my socks off. And I'm talking about Creatures of the Night. And his singing on the song Danger. Man, he is on 10 on this song. Just full of, again, piss and vinegar. And he's going low voice, he's going high voice, he's belting it, he's coming down. It's almost like he's running. He's taking his voice through all the vocal Olympics, if you will, throughout the whole vocal. He's really at the top of his range, and then he comes back down again, and then he kind of does the typical sort of pushing growl thing that he does. That song really shows all the sort of levels of Paul singing. If you listen to it, he's not just doing this; he's all over the place. It's really, really impressive. Really, really impressive. So there you go. So those are my 5 favorite Paul Stanley performances. If you've got some favorite Paul performances, throw those in the comments. Please hit the like and subscribe. That really helps the channel. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day. Cheers.